Hey, everybody, welcome to another episode of The Family Business, where we discuss how family and careers are intertwined. I am thrilled to announce that Gabriel Sanchez, the co founder of Inspectra Health, has agreed to join us. Gabriel, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Matt. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, man, after speaking to you just a few times, it felt like this is a no brainer. I mean, you have a unique background and great personality and a great storyteller, and that usually adds up to a terrific conversation. So, it is. I think people are going to learn about a lot about you. You have a unique history, that's for sure. So, what we usually do in the beginning is just take a minute and just give a quick snapshot. Okay, this is what Inspectra Health is, and this is what I do, and then we can delve into the fun stuff about your background that I think people will find interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. So the quick synopsis is Inspectra Health is spin out from Stanford University. It's based on work that I developed during my PhD, and what we're working on is basically changing the way that we access cellular imaging. So instead of being required to cut tissue out of the body and then mount that on slides for visualization, we can image live cellular tissue. And there's big opportunities around that. Our vision is to really move pathology away from a slide-based format to a medium-free, purely digital imaging approach. And we're sort of at the clinical stage. We're venture-backed, working on some really exciting things now in terms of gathering our first clinical data, and still a small, scrappy team, 10 folks, and a bunch of folks helping part-time. So we make it work. But I think we'll have big implications for particularly people suffering from skin cancer, which is the single most prevalent cancer of all varieties.
Yeah, I mean the implications. You're kind of short selling it. I mean, for my dad has it, and so I just saw him yesterday. He had his nose is all carved up, and he's had multiple biopsies, and just to have an opportunity where a biopsy is not necessary, I mean, it changes the game for everyone involved. Patients don't have to walk around looking like that unnecessarily. Doctors don't have to deal with the decision-making process, the length of time. I mean, all these other things that can change something. They've been doing the same way for how long? 50 years, 75 years? They've been doing it the same way?
Well, so this field has been stagnant for 150 years.
Jeez.
So pathology has been one of the longest holdouts to really accept innovation, and it's really because optics just has certain physical limits on how you can image tissue, and the only way we've learned to really do that is to cut it out and put it on glass, because that's like a crystal clear window, and then you can see the tissue. And then when you cut it that thin, you got to stain it. So there's all kinds of limitations that force you to use that medium. Really, we haven't seen any innovation on that side for over a century and a half. We're starting to see some exciting innovation in terms of digitizing images and applying machine learning to analyzing those images, but that's actually on the back end of pathology. And what we're really trying to target is the input side, right? So like, would it be possible to just image without cutting, image without staining, image without weighting? That's what our technology is all about. And it's a little complicated. We use a combination of multiphoton and reflectance confocal microscopy, but just to suffice it to say that it's a cool way to image live tissue using natural fluorescence that the tissue generates itself to make colors. So it's been a stagnant space. We would really like to. I think the ML is really 21st century, but it'd be really nice to bring some 21st century hardware or instrument innovation to the space as well.
Well, so to me, that was one of the more interesting parts of the story is, and correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't this all come from your development and creation of this microscope when you were doing your dissertation, and that's kind of how this started?
That's right. Yeah, it's really interesting because like so when I was at Stanford for my master's and PhD, I joined a lab that was studying human movement, human biomechanics, and actually trying to build computer models to better understand how people move and help them avoid things like osteoarthritis, and studied conditions like cerebral palsy or muscular dystrophy. But there's this underlying assumption about how muscle works that we only know from the cadaver studies. We don't really know how it works in vivo. And so there was this drive to try to study these structures, these sarcomere structures, this contractile element in living tissue. And you can kind of do that. There was a group in my lab before us that had found a way to sort of do it using the traditional instrument, which is about a 500-pound behemoth, 8 foot by 4 foot optical table. And I joined that project. And when I looked at that, I was like, well, your problem is not the images or anything. The problem is it's that refrigerator that you're using. You can't get any data off of it, right? So I started working on, well, like what we really would like to do is some sort of a portable, miniaturized version of this that you can bring to the patient and really get some more useful data. So in the quest of answering really a science problem, we developed a new modality for imaging live tissue. And then ultimately that evolved into a point where I realized, well, this has way broader implications and more impact just than expanding our knowledge on fundamental science and biology.
Was there a moment? Was there a moment that you're like, holy, you know what? This is something like, did somebody, a professor or a physician or someone say, just stop for a second, Gabriel. You don't really understand what you stumbled onto here. Or maybe you did, I don't know. With like, this is substantial.
There were a few moments, but there's one in particular. So I'm quite tight with the Stanford Biodesign Group. Paul Yock was the chair of my defense committee for my thesis, and we were, I got my PhD, which was exciting. And then but so they passed me. But then he would talk to me a little bit about like, well, I think we could do more with this, right? And he connected me to a group of dermatologists at Stanford, Justin Coe and Rob Navoa, and I had no background or concept of even considering using this for something other than imaging muscle. And we started looking into the literature and realizing like that this should actually work for something that's more clinically impactful immediately, right? And so the funny thing was we went and spent about a week hacking this muscle system to make a crude skin probe. And I had Justin Coe there, and I put it on my face. And we're like, hey, we can like see stuff. Like this is pretty remarkable. It was very crude, and it was not remotely where it is now. But that was the genesis. And that at that point, I was still I was an instructor at Stanford. I was an instructor in the bioengineering department. But that started the wheels clicking. That I was like, okay, there's more that there's 5 years from now, this technology is going to be at the center of something very impactful. And so we started working on the process of how do you extract that out of the university and translate it into a company.
I mean, it's a long road from New Mexico for you to get there. And I would love for people to hear a bit about your story, because it's such a unique path. In fact, you're probably the only person on this planet that I'll ever speak to that has something similar, to come from where you came from, to go to MIT and then to Stanford, and then to be rubbing elbows with, I mean, Paul and that group there's no one above that as far as knowledge and impact and resources. And so let's try to start from the beginning. So when you're in New Mexico and you're living, if I'm not mistaken, it's a farm, right?
Yeah, I grew up on actually one stretch a cattle ranch.
Okay.
But we did farming. We did both types of work in New Mexico, which is farming and ranching.
Yeah.
Right. But yeah, we lived on both. And it's very remote. Like it's hard to even explain so much. I was about 12 miles of dirt road off the main interstate, and when I went to high school, about 65 miles from my high school, just to give you a sense of scale. It'd be like crossing Rhode Island or something.
So you were driving. So let's get some context. So you're driving well over an hour to school every day.
Yeah, it's about an hour and a half because you unfortunately you can't drive fast enough on the dirt road. Right? Yeah. So it's pretty long. Yeah.
All right, not gonna try to be a wise guy here, but was it like a pickup truck or a tractor? Like, how are you driving?
Right. Yeah, that's great. No, I had an old clunky Ford Ranger that I inherited because I fixed it. Yeah. And so yeah, and that was always sort of the deal, was like I could have the car if I could repair it. Although that one ultimately disintegrated, and then I got this like really clunky little Mazda Protege that was completely totaled, but I stripped that all the way down to the block, rebuilt the engine up, and then that became my car. And so it was just kind of careening down the dirt roads in this little clown car.
So yeah, that's a funny visual. So how did you, when you're growing up, you're 10, 12 years old, or maybe even younger, and you had a natural affinity for things mechanical? It just came to you intuitively? Or where is that moment where you're with your family or with your friends and you're starting to say, I can rebuild that engine? I mean, that I know a lot of kids, and I don't know anyone who could do that at that age.
Yeah, it's I definitely have a knack. There's no question I had a knack and sort of a talent for most things mechanical and science related. There's a couple weird moments, like there's one that I would really look back to. It goes even earlier than that. Was that I have many siblings. I have three brothers and a sister, and we would always go down to the local library as all good mothers try to educate their children. And my mom was really diligent about that, and so she would take us to the library. We'd get the books, and as all kids do, we're like getting books on sorcery and like Harry Potter and like kind of fantasy type books. And at some point, she sort of flipped the switch and she's like, "You guys got to get like some sort of a nonfiction book every now and then, or a technical book or something, right?" And I grabbed the closest book, which was the history of the steam engine, and became my favorite book for about 5 years. And so I just continuously checked that book out. But it led down to, and then I just started gravitating towards that section. And then my mom said at some point, eventually, the only books that I would go get out of the library were the nonfiction books. And it was like rocketry, computer science, electronics design, whatever. And that put me very much on sort of a pathway for that in those early elementary years, where that was just where my passion was. But getting to kind of there was actually a moment when I was 13. I've always been very into space exploration, sort of the NASA story and the history of that. And on my 13th birthday, my dad took me to go see Apollo 13.
Okay.
And, I would have thought I would have come out of that movie motivated to become an astronaut, but I had actually a very different reaction. I came out of there being like, oh man, I need to be an engineer, because in my mind, the engineers saved those men's lives. And probably the best scene I think in cinematic history that really exemplifies engineering is when they got to make the air filter box out of garbage, and they're like, we got what's on the table. These guys are gonna die. Come up with something fast, and it was one of the best scenes I'd ever seen. And pretty much from that point on, I was like, yeah, I'm gonna have a big social impact through innovation. And that was sort of the broad vision, and I've followed that wherever that's led me.
So, so let's explore that for just a bit because there's a lot there. Your family and teachers and other people you're exposed to, were they constantly fostering this, or were you? Because it sounds like it came out of nowhere. It's not like people were putting you in classes or getting you involved in programs and internships. It sounded like it was self motivated and self taught. But then your family, you're hoping that they're encouraging you and like your dad's taking you to movies that are involved and your mom's getting you books. But what happens at that point? Now you're 13. Now it really starts to expedite and this is a bit of a quote unquote launching pad, no pun intended, of where you're going with this. Like what happens at that point? Are they constantly seeing there's something in you, or are they just letting you build your own path and they're just being there if you need them?
um well, so it's interesting, right? Because at this time there was not a STEM or a STEAM or a lot of the like intentional sort of guidance trying to drive young inspired children into these fields. So it was a little more, it was sort of forming, right? Like it was, in the 80s and 90s, this was not really a deep educational push. I think the way it is now, a nice intentional push. But it was very clear to everyone around me that I had this interest and that I had the skills to excuse me, pursue it. So I got a lot of support in that. I should also say, my dad's also a mechanical engineer. So he was sort of the first in his family to go a little bit beyond the farm, although we did the farm and ranching work primarily because of lifestyle and upbringing. And my parents have very interesting personalities. They're both deep into learning. My dad is a little more practical. I think of him as the engineer, and he's sort of like, what process or formula are we going to use to make this happen? And he ultimately navigated more into management, project management, and team management. Whereas my mom is a little bit of a purist in terms of learning for the sake of learning. And she really has that sort of deeper love of just like where I would say I get the hunger for research, right? And so between the two of them, I did get a little bit of this formation in thinking broadly, learning for the sake of learning, discovering things unscripted, but then also trying to apply it practically and thinking about things in a way that will be helpful. And one of the mechanisms that they used to really fuel that was I actually got a lot of support in the science fairs early on, and so I did a lot of work through middle school and even into high school, participating in kind of the local, regional, and state science fairs. And I kind of forgot about this, but my brother dug up a school yearbook picture from when I was in 8th grade, and my project was I built a prosthetic arm, a robotic hand, and the idea was to try to develop, some sort of an electromechanical device to assist people that are amputees. And so there was a germ of that, like needs finding process and med device sort of inclination, I guess, even early on. That's
so how
couldn't
is
avoid.
that? How is that relating to your siblings? So you've got 4 of them, and you're in this unique academic, scientific mindset, and they're similar or they're different. I don't know, but are they doing all your chores? Like, how are you guys working all this out? This relationship. I mean, I don't know if were they the same as you or were they totally different?
I'm definitely kind of a black sheep in the family. I'm a bit of the weird one. Everyone pretty much lives at home. I'm the one strange person that's in California. They're kind of off doing his thing. But what we do have is we have a common thread of valuing education through the family very deeply. So we probably have something like 10 degrees amongst us in the family. Both my parents teach. My mom and my dad were married. They had their first, my sister, when they were in undergrad, and my mom actually put her degree on hold and then completed her bachelor's when she was 50. So which is awesome, right? So my son, her grandson, actually attended her graduation party. Wow. But both my parents teach. I have a brother who teaches at the middle school level. My sister's a biologist and she teaches at high school. So we have kind of a deep thread of kind of the love of education and a lot of teaching, actually. And I do think I venture a little more towards the application side, though, maybe. Although originally I thought that's what I was going to be. I was on that track. I just thought I'd be, teaching through an academic setting. I thought I'd be going professor. So for me, it was a little bit of a surprise to stumble on, to have that moment, to see this opportunity and be like, oh, actually, I think maybe I could have impact in a different way and follow that. So it was interesting.
I have this image in my head of you having like a workshop in a part of the barn, and then you're getting torn between I want to work on myself, but the hay needs to be baled, or I need to shovel, or I need to do something with the animals. Like, I imagine as you got older, it must have got a little more frustrating having to do the day-to-day work at the ranch.
Yeah, I'm just kind of laughing a little bit because it became disastrous at one point where I had gotten a fresh chemistry set and I almost burned the barn down. Awesome. But yeah, no, I had a whole lab, so I had the place where I was working on my robots. I had my chemistry set, had the microscopes and all the things set up and they kind of gave me a corner of the shed. They're like, you can have that corner and go nuts. And I was working on an experiment. I had forgotten to shovel something, let's say. So I was like, I got to go shovel a little bit and left something hot. And then when I came back, it was like, oh, that's burning. So I got to explain to the fire department what on earth, what I was cooking in there, and that it wasn't anything illegal, but it was, and that was, I was about 14 years old. And so I have the distinct, honor in my family of being the kid who almost burnt the barn down.
That was like your first defense of your thesis. All right, so
here's what pretty much. Yeah. So let me just, yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's interesting having a 14-year-old kind of like, everybody just calm down. Like it's not as bad as it looks, right? Like,
there's nothing flammable in here other than the hay and the wood and everything else.
Well, everything flammable had already burnt away, right? So it was like, it's like, it's pretty safe now, right? Yeah, it's unfortunate, but they still give me some grief over that, but well deserved.
Yeah. Listen, that's the nature.
All in
of
the
siblings.
name of science.
Yep.
Yeah.
So I'm curious where where does your wife fit into all of this? Because to get involved in this adventure, it takes a certain kind of person, and my guess is someone who can keep up with you or maybe even surpass you. So take a minute and give me a little bit of her background, and then we'll talk about your kids too.
More the latter, more surpassing, definitely. Yeah, I met my wife at MIT when I was an undergrad, and we met on the first day I was there.
Really?
Yeah, so I was fortunate to get into after being admitted into an early summer program to basically experience the campus, take some classes, learn the community and sort of get acclimated for a month or two before the semester started. And she was in the same program, and so we became close and friends during that program. We started dating actually the first week of normal admission. So most people that showed up think that we met that first week and we just started dating, but we had a little bit of time together where we got to know each other. She studies civil engineering and structural engineering, which is close enough to mechanical that we got over our differences. But she's really strong. I mean, you have to have, unfortunately, a really strong personality and tolerance for the startup life, right? So we had done undergrad at MIT. We both got into Stanford, so we both were doing master's degree at Stanford. She was studying structural engineering. I was studying mechanical. I decided to pursue the PhD, so I stayed in school, and she worked, and she worked me through the PhD. And my kids came through my PhD. So I've actually lived a little bit of this of the flipped experience where I was staying at home with the kids 3 days a week, and kind of part-time with her aunt, and she was working in the city. And so I actually know very viscerally that feeling of like when she comes to the door and you hand the baby off and you're like, take this kid, so I was the one doing that. I was like, take him. I'm like, I need 5 minutes. I need a break. Right. But it was funny, I would sometimes I would take my son to the lectures at Stanford and in the little baby strap thing. And he'd be there with me. So he got exposed to some of that very early on. But she's very steady. She's, to be able to ride that roller coaster, it's a little nuts.
Does she work now?
So now she's at home. So now it's a little more flip-flopped. The pandemic has been a bit of a disaster, obviously, primarily because I think, she works best, in teams and with live people. And that got really disrupted. And it's different across the country, but California is just, I think I'm starting to see, we're seeing some movement in a very positive way, and people are coming back together. I'm in the office a lot more. So now she's thinking a lot more about, okay, maybe I might want to go back and jump back into this. But she enjoyed, I think, a lot of time with our young kids, and that window's closing too, right? So that's been a very valuable, I think we have mixed feelings about that as well. We're so excited to see them grow up, but sort of sad to see them grow up.
Well, the good news is the window never really closes. It's just either it gets smaller or it just changes to a different window. My kids are 18 and 15, and I could tell you that they still need you to no end. It's just different kind of need, and sometimes it's just, hey, can we just go grab dinner somewhere or go for a bike ride? Like there's nothing overly dramatic happening other than they just want to spend time with you or bounce something off of you. It's interesting. You and I have something in common. My wife traveled a ton when we first had our kids, and so I was working, but I was carrying the water with the kids, and so I remember those days when she would be gone for 10 days, living, in the Four Seasons and flying first class. I'm like, that's great. Her diaper needs to be changed, and so I remember that feeling of when they are coming in. And now you always have that in your back pocket for saying, you don't understand what I'm dealing with. I'm like, yeah, you do. I lived it. Yeah.
But I've definitely lived it a bit, and it's funny you say that, because when we sort of flipped the script a little bit and I started the company and started being the one who was doing more of the traveling, there was nothing I looked forward to more than going to a hotel and I mean, like, oh, it's bedtime, I'm going to bed.
You don't have to cut anyone's food up. You don't have to blow on it because it's too hot. You don't have to. I mean, the stuff that you got to deal with. You're just like, I went to MIT. I don't need to do this, to mush up your peas.
Yeah, well, it's funny, right?
And,
Yeah, exactly.
yeah. So
Exactly.
that's so I'm curious about something like this because this happens a lot with couples like you guys. Is all right. So you're both MIT, Stanford, uh, just significant academic backgrounds. Now you've got two kids, and they're in elementary school and middle school, so there's still plenty of time. But is it difficult to either encourage them academically without saying, "Hey, look, what we did is what we did, but I don't want you to feel like you have to go to MIT." Because your 12-year-old for sure will understand like that's a college at an elite level. How do you encourage them without making them feel the pressure of trying to be you or your wife?
Yeah, man. Yeah, if I knew that, yeah, that's a great question. It's very tricky, right? Because like I tend to live by more basic rules than by scripts, right? So like I didn't script that I wanted to go specifically to MIT or Stanford. I don't often have this like 20-year roadmap. I usually more have sort of foundational guidelines that I live by, and that sort of leads me where I go. And for me, it was always like I wanted to maximize my potential for something impactful and beneficial on a larger scale. Versus for me, that became sort of through innovation. And when I look at my kids, I think they got great potential, and I've sort of taken that same approach. I really want you to have the passion and the motivation to live up to your potential, to do something meaningful with what you've been given. How that manifests, I'm not that strict on the particulars. I don't really think, it's interesting when you study, at least in my field in technology, math is math. It doesn't matter where you go. Differential calculus is the same at every single university. There are differences in terms of like networks, definitely, and like opportunities that you like. I'm meeting people like in biodesign. That is a side benefit of being in that environment of Stanford University and having access to that type of a network. But I think that you just have to find the thing that you will actually invest the effort in, that you've got the passion for, and let that lead you. And but I still have high standards for them, because I do think they have that capacity for whatever it will be that they pick. And so I'm not going to let them slouch, but,
So
but
so
yeah.
do you leave tools around the house and half finished projects, things like just to encourage your kids to say, "Oh, I'd like to work on that," or they may not be mechanically inclined at all, and they want to dance or make music or whatever it is that they do that's completely not at all what you've
Right.
done. Like that, is that hard for you to watch them would rather play video games? He's not looking to fix anything, build anything.
I not really. It's funny. Like I can watch pianist, and I know nothing about playing the piano, but I can tell that this is somebody who is just tremendously gifted in the craft, and that is super inspirational to me. I just like to see excellence or achievement of what's possible kind of in any particular realm. It doesn't really bother me. Now I will say sometimes you can't hide from heredity. I mean, they have quite a lot of inclination
Oh, do they?
in our direction. Yeah, and I mean, I was the same too. Like I mean, my dad was an engineer, and I thought, like, what would be more trite or cliche than being a mechanical engineer like my dad. So I tried to rebel for a little bit and be a theoretical physicist, but it was just too too nebulous and abstract, right? So when I look at my kids, they have that. But what's interesting to me is they have more of a commercialization mindset and aptitude than I did, and I think that's run off from what I'm working on. So, for example, my daughter is starting a cafe. She's but she's like serious about it, which I think is fantastic. I was like, "Oh, you're gonna sell brownies or whatever?" She said, "No, I'm gonna run a business." She's interviewing other girls on our street. They submit resumes.
You serious?
Yeah, I'm not no joke. I found her working with one of our neighbors, and I was like, "What are you working on?" She's like, "Oh, this is her resume." And I was like, "How do you have a resume in third grade?" And I looked at it, and it's, "What's your experience?" "Oh, I went to Las Lomitas Elementary. I've done some baking. I I like to taste, I like pastries mostly or whatever. So there's a lot of that out of my kids that I think is a bit of a side effect from what they see with me. And I think that's actually good. I kind of came around sort of later to the sort of commercial side of implementing innovation, but it's so critical to that's the only way you can really impact anything, right? And so my major shift, I think, as I went through my process, was going from more of a foundational knowledge and expanding the space of what we understand around biological imaging to more of a, like, can we do this in a way that has impact for the general population? They don't need to understand it, it just needs to make the impact, right? And that's a little different. And I think they have more of that than I did.
It
I
just
think that'd be great.
yeah, it just seems like the kids, honestly, they do more watching than listening, I've found. And they pay attention to what you do and what you say and where you've been and all that kind of situations of how you handle different things, how your wife handles different things. I mean, it's pretty obvious that your wife is who she is, so your daughter is trying to emulate, okay, I want to be like my mom. There's nothing better when you hear your words or your wife's words come out of their mouth. You're like, wow, you got that? So it's pretty cool when that happens. Now, so talk about how those are intertwined, though. So you came up with this idea. You're going to build this company. Did your wife look at you like you had lost your mind when you first said, I'm going to do this? Or is she's like right behind you and says, let's do it? How did that conversation go?
She's always behind me on these sorts of things. I mean, and it has to be a joint decision. Again, it's funny. Like I tend to make decisions a little more in the moment based on general sort of guidelines and principles. For me, it became clear that this was an area where I could have a lot of impact, and that I thought it would be different than going, say, the tenure track, trying to start a lab and pursue, still advance this technology, but from an academic perspective, right? Um, but and it would almost have to make that decision that way, and also with a little bit of naivety, because if you really think about it, you'd be like, okay, I'm still technically, I just freshly graduated. I'm 1 year into my first real job. I had 2 kids during my PhD, and we're living in Menlo Park, like one of the most expensive places in the world. Like, why would you start a startup without financing? You can't pay yourself. You can't. It seems a little reckless. I worry about it sometimes, like, am I being an irresponsible father? But it also creates a sense of necessity. It's, we have to make this work. We have to go get the money. We have to make this thing, has to happen, and I'm determined for it to succeed. And she knows, my wife senses that and feels that. And we had this long conversation, and we were like, well, this is the time to do it. The same thing with the kids. Like, if you wait till you're ready, you're just going to get stuck waiting.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
and I'm
you
like,
know that Dr. Seuss, The Waiting Place. I mean,
right,
that's what it
yeah,
is. And
yeah,
yeah. So
yeah.
I'm curious, has she ever been to New Mexico before she met you?
No, most people haven't. No, no.
Even by accident?
Uh,
She didn't like just drive in there unintentionally? Where
I don't think so.
where's
She
she
had been.
from?
She's from here in
Oh, she's
California,
from
so
Cali.
she's
Okay.
from Oakland. Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
I know they had taken like a family trip down to Mexico, but not through not kind of through our excuse me, not through our pathway. Our pathway would be more through like El Paso and Juarez, and I think they went down kind of through more of the California side, through like Baja and stuff. But
Okay.
yeah, it's no, it's a pretty remote place, right? Like when I went to MIT, there were 5 people from the entire state that got admitted that year, right? So you could count them like this. I'm one of the fingers.
Yeah.
I could find those people, right? It's pretty rare.
Now, so you also have the distinction of being involved with two rather significant groups in California besides Stanford Biodesign, and that's Fogarty and Rosenman, the symposium there. So I wouldn't mind just a couple of minutes because I don't want to keep you too long here, but I think it's interesting to find out about some of the networking and some of the groups that you've been connected to, because both of those seem to have a significant impact on you building this company.
Yeah, so I learned a little bit inefficiently, but I learned a lesson in my PhD that relationships are the most critical aspect of success and advancement. And when I was in the PhD, I was a little more nose to the grindstone during work in the lab, trying to let the work stand on the merits of its own merits, and kind of make sure that things are getting accomplished and published. But really what it comes down to is, you need to know people that are in positions that can help you to take the next step, that can give you the guidance that you need. You don't have the benefit of experience yet, and so you need to sort of supplement that around you. And as I came into the med tech field, I made a very intentional and concerted effort to invest in breaking into some of these networks. So I was fortunate. I started in the Fogarty network. One of my advisors and my co-founders, Scott Delp, was close with Dr. Fogarty through some work at Stanford. And when I went there, they didn't have space for a company. They were still kind of small at that time. And so I rented the closet, and I was like, I will rent the closet. We were only 2 people in the company at the time. And so we bought this closet that has it's like a triangle because they smashed it into the only corner of the building they could put it in. So we literally got a desk from IKEA and sawed the corner off of it and shoved it into the sort of polygonal sort of shaped room.
So
but
you're
it
like
all
Harry
started
Potter.
there.
You're like the guy underneath the staircase.
Pretty much, yeah, exactly. And so we made it work. We made our first prototypes out of that teeny tiny little room. And then as Fogarty, we've grown up with Fogarty. Fogarty has grown into this, it was at one point the Institute, but now it's Fogarty Innovation, and it's really this center of medtech innovation that's super broad, across multiple disciplines. Bringing in some of the best and the brightest, led by some of the best and the brightest, and on a mission to have massive impact through patient care. And we grew through that. We were actually part of that. And I've actually been fortunate. One of the things that they allow is what they call flexible tenure. And they, if you're still contributing to the community and there's still a mutual benefit in both directions for the company and Fogarty, you can stick around. And I've been able to be there for 5+ years now. And that's been absolutely essential. And the relationships we built through there, one of which was Rosenman, same thing. So I've come across Christine Winoto through a mutual connection, not even related to Rosenman, just as she was starting the Rosenman Institute. And she was telling me the story, and I was basically fundraising and trying to make connections to different investors, but we just really clicked, and the mission that they're on at Rosenman clicked, and another wonderful network that we could tap into to be part of this broader ecosystem. So I'm always looking for ways to connect better with people that are movers and shakers in the field. I try to do my best to pay that forward and help folks out. And there's a saying of like, don't be a crab in the bucket. And I think that's just super relevant to our space, which is that, don't pull people down, try to help people out. And if we can help the whole community as a whole, that elevates the entire ecosystem, right? And so I try to find people that have that mindset, and opportunities just stem out of that, because those are kind of the people that want to make things happen.
Well, they feel, and I think that I've seen this enough in the 20 years I've been doing this, there's a certain level of authenticity to you where there's comfort in trust, because they're not just giving you money, they're giving you their name, their support. It's a reflection on them, on who they associate with and who they invest in. It's not just a financial connection, it's very personal. And you just have this, I don't know, you just exude this certain level of enthusiasm and excitement, and obviously they feel that it's warranted. And so, this is amazing how this has all been built out. And now you're just scratching the surface. You have so much potential to go, but I like the fact that you still seem to be aware of the steps are incremental at times, and you have to not get so far ahead of yourself that you're forgetting about what I have to do day to day to get to where we're going. And you're just a very humble guy. It's really amazing to me how many people, we were just talking about this before we sat down. I was trying to explain to the folks that are running all this, who am I talking to and who this is, and the word I kept saying was humble. I said, the guy you would never know talking to you that this is who you are. So your parents did a good job.
Right.
And that much I can tell
hope
you.
So.
Yeah,
I hope so. No, it's good. Yeah. I will say one thing that I do that works. I do have approaches to get to gaining, advocates and allies. And one thing I have always done is I perform first and promise later, which is a little inverted of a lot of the fundraising story. A lot of time you're telling the story to get the resources so that you can then go make the progress. And I'm really good at, and it's got to be the background and how I grew up being resourceful in farming and ranching, but I'm good at scrapping together reasons to believe and showing things. So, a lot of times I can get, following and teamwork from people because I can show them what we've already done. And so like when I first met Paul Yock and the biodesign folks, and I actually started working with them, helping the fellows design their prototypes and do their bench testing. I showed up. Usually you show up with a resume. I showed up with a box of prototypes, and I was like, here's a handful of things that I built. Like, here's a circuit I did. I always do that, and I usually bring things. And when I'm pitching investors, I was like, come by our office. I'll image myself. I'll show you what it does, right? Let's really look at it, right? And so a lot of times I'm trying to, you got to pay a little bit of you say trust. You got to invest a little bit of currency there to kind of show them like you're legit, and we are determined to make this happen, but we can make it happen. And that's a unique opportunity, right? Like if it's a big bold vision, it's hard to accomplish, but it's feasible for you, then I think that's a good reason to invest, right? And it doesn't mean it's going to happen. It's not guaranteed, but it's not going to be for lack of effort or anything that we do, so we believe we can make it.
Nah, my money's on you. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Well, this has been every bit
Thank you.
as entertaining as I expected. You probably could go on for another hour, just interesting things that have happened in your life, and we'll have to revisit and do this again to get the other part of your life involved. Maybe get your family in on this too to hear what they think of you and this adventure of yours. So thank you so much for being on there. This has been The Family Business with Gabriel Sanchez. Thanks so much for being a part of the show.
Thank you. It was my pleasure. It was an honor.
Yeah. Take care.
Take care.